Before we go back 900 years, let's look at the more recent past. Exactly 100 years ago, 1920. What was going on in the world, and especially in Sicily, where Giuseppe Arezzo and his wife Agata Maria Francesca Vincenza lived in this house in Ragusa with their 8 children. 1920, that was the year the last sibling was born. As I told you previously, my mother Maria was born in August of that year. The oldest child, Constantina, or Aunt Connie as I knew her, would have been 12. Next in line was Rosalia, who would have been 10 years old. Next up was Ignazia, or Ina, who would have been 8 years old. Then we have our first male, Giorgio, who would have been 6, followed by Salvatore, 4 years old, Federico, 2, Carmelo would have been a 1-year-old. And then there's my mom, Maria, who was born in August of 1920. You can see there was also another child, Giorgio, born in August of 1909 and died 8 months later in April of 1910. So their ages in 1920 would have been 12, 10, 8, 6, 4, 2, 1, and a newborn. Now that's spacing your kids out with precision. Now, Sicily after World War I, and much like Europe, was suffering tremendously economically with hyperinflation, wiping out life savings, unemployment, and widespread poverty. Politically, Mussolini and the fascists were on the rise, gaining power, and the mafia was widespread in Sicily and at its very strongest during this period, squeezing rich and poor alike. Meanwhile, in the United States, things couldn't have been more different. Prosperity was on the rise, social change was in the air, America was coming into its own as a great power. It seemed like the beginning of something, not the end of something, as it must have felt like in Sicily. So in 1923, when tragedy struck the Arezzo household, with the unexpected and sudden death of Agatha, it's not hard to understand why Giuseppe made the decision to take his family to America and plant the Arezzo name on this side of the Atlantic. We know Giuseppe had made at least one trip to America alone in 1921. Whether that was related to his import business or whether he was contemplating moving to America at that time, we can only speculate. He did have a brother, Federico, that had emigrated to America in 1914 and was living in Brooklyn. By the way, Federico was one of 10 brothers and sisters of Giuseppe. As you can see, the first Giuseppe died in his first year. Another sibling died at age 3, one at 17, another at 20. Unfortunately, Giuseppe was no stranger to tragedy. In July of 1925, Giuseppe took his 4 oldest children, Connie, Leah, Ina, and George, and boarded the SS Duilio out of Naples bound for New York City. Giuseppe and his children entered the United States under his treaty trader status. A treaty trader visa was someone who was coming to the United States to engage in substantial trade in services and/or technology. Giuseppe was engaged in the food import business and must have qualified under those criteria. Neither he nor the children had visitor visas, and that becomes important a little later in the story. Giuseppe brought the 4 youngest children, Sal, Fred, Carl, and Maria, to America 2 years later in April of 1927. The 1930 census indicates that the entire Arezzo family lived at 2127 83rd Street in Brooklyn. And here we see on the 1930 census Beatrice Arezzo. That's BG as we used to call her. Giuseppe married Beatrice Gallo on May 28, 1928. Perhaps these 2 fuzzy photos of some of the siblings were taken at that address. Here is a better photo when they were a little older. And when I look at this photo, I try to think what it was like for them, what their lives were like. Well, we can get a little hint by looking at some newsletters that we have of the Junior League of the Society of the Children of Ragusa, which was a social organization founded by Giuseppe in 1934 and which grew to over 400 members. The younger members of the club formed a junior league, which included the Arezzo siblings, and they put out a monthly newsletter called The Rag, a play on the slang word for a newspaper and that the fact that they were from Ragusa. The Arezzo siblings were very active members of the Junior League, and there are frequent references to them, usually in a good-natured ribbing sort of way, which to be one of the main staples of the newsletters. Here you can see both Connie and my mother Mary being mentioned. Connie, who was the oldest sibling, would have been 29 years old at the time, and my mother 17. Just think about that for a moment. 8 brothers and sisters spanning a decade in age, all hanging out together in the same social group, watching out for each other, taking care of each other. I couldn't imagine that happening in modern times, and I think it tells you a little bit about what kind of people they were. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of articles. This one talks about Giuseppe, as I said, who founded the club, and it was interesting to read how others saw him. The article starts off with the abbreviation CAVUF, which stands for Cavaliere Ufficiale, which is an honorific bestowed on someone from the state, kind of like being knighted in England. I don't know if Giuseppe was actually bestowed this honor or the writer of the article was just using it as a sign of respect. But in any case, the article goes on to discuss the achievements of the organization and attributes it to, as he says, one man, Giuseppe Arezzo, a man whose energy, merits, and aims we have learned to know through his unimpeachable sense of justice, a man whose earnest efforts have been the nucleus of our success and whose prowess is the reason for our progress. Hence, we shall stand united in mind, united in body, around the one man we can trust with the reins of our society. Obviously a fan. Another article caught my attention was written by Leah, and it shows her sharp mind and even sharper tongue. It's titled, What the Junior League Needs. Some of her entries are more self-control during the meetings, less self-control after the meetings. More young men with the ability to enjoy themselves without the aid of liquid stimulation. Less members who insist on suggesting a trip to Coney Island for a custard while dancing is going on. More girls who are not afraid to show their intelligence. Leah was a liberated woman before anyone knew what that term meant. She was no one's fool. But Leah also had a romantic side as well. Her poem, The Kiss, in the same issue, amply shows that side of her. The kiss. What is the kiss? The kiss is a rosy apostrophe put between the words ti amo, a communion of two souls, the prelude to love, the preface of the idyll, a means of making a heart tremble, the savoring of two souls on the lips, something sweeter than the morning dew, an instant of infinity that has the rustle of a bee among the plants, the dream of a Ragusan. The kiss is everything. Leah and Connie lived together their entire lives and were totally devoted to each other. Oh, one last thing. The Sons of Ragusa social club that Giuseppe founded in 1935 still exists today, 85 years later, still helping new immigrants from Sicily adjust to their new home. Its current location is on 18th Street in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. And this article that you're looking at is actually a translation from an Italian website highlighting notable Ragusans. Pretty remarkable.